Hey, how's it going everyone? This is Leon from Studio Vision and today we are going over the FeltMaker. This video is supposed to be a quick starter guide on the installation, and we'll also follow up with a quick illustration to showcase how the FeltMaker can be used. You can access the file after purchase through 3 different places. There is a download link immediately after you make your purchase, a separate email will be sent to you with the download link, and lastly, you can always find the download link in your order account page. When you open up the folder, you will see 3 different files. One is the textures themselves, the other one is the brushes, and the third is the style. For the brushes and style to work, it's recommended that you have Photoshop CS6 or above. Okay, now with Photoshop open, the first thing we would be doing is creating a new document. You can go here and click Files on the top left, clicking New, and the document size we will be working with is 6000 x 4000 pixels. Set the orientation to landscape and everything else can just be default. With a new document open up, the first thing we would do is try and make our workflow as efficient as possible. And to do this, we can go back to our product files and double click on the felt folder and drag all of these felt textures right into our library tab on the right. If you don't see the library tab on the right, you can go over to the top of the Windows tab, go all the way down until you see libraries and make sure this is checked. Now with all the graphic assets put into the library, the next thing we'll do is we'll group these things together and give it a name. You can give any name you like for the group, but I'll be calling mine the FeltMaker 2 since I already have another group named the FeltMaker. Okay, now that we have the textures moved into our library, the next thing we wanted to do is install our brushes and the style. And to do this, it's really simple. All you have to do is double click on the brushes, and then going back to the folder, double clicking on the style once more. To check whether or not the brushes and styles are installed properly, press B on your keyboard or go over to the left panel and click the brush tool. Right click on the canvas, and if it's installed properly, there should be a folder with all the brushes installed. And to see whether or not the style is installed, all you needed to do is go over to the Windows tab again and go all the way down and make sure the Styles tab is checked. And under the Styles tab, you'll see that the felt style, there should be a new style for you to select from. What I generally like to do is move the styles into the Libraries tab so that we can close out the Styles tab and don't have to worry about it anymore. Okay, now that we have the installation out of the way, I'll show you a quick illustration to get you started on how to create realistic felt-like illustrations. For the illustration we are doing today, we are making the YouTube logo. Now the YouTube logo is really simple, it only consists of 2 colors, red and white. So we will be going over to the right hand side of the libraries panel and dragging the color red into our canvas, and then we'll look for white and do the same thing. Okay, now that we have the 2 texture colors in our canvas, the next thing we needed to do is resize it, and we can do this by pressing Ctrl T on our keyboard. And we will do the same thing for red. And when it comes to my workflow, I generally like to press mask on the bottom right. To hide the selection, I press Ctrl I on the keyboard with the mask selected to hide the selection. As you can see, the red is no longer appearing, so I'll be doing the same thing for the white texture as well. Pressing mask and pressing Ctrl I on the keyboard to hide the selection. Since I do this process so often, I have a keyboard shortcut specifically for creating that mask and inversing the selection. And to do this, you can go over to the Edit tab on the top left and going all the way down until you see keyboard shortcuts. Now with the keyboard shortcuts panel open, the next thing we will do is click Layers. Expanding on the layer and scrolling all the way down until you see Layer Mask. And underneath Layer Mask, there's the Hide All option, and you can see I already have a keyboard shortcut assigned to it. The shortcut I am using is Ctrl-Shift-M. You can assign other shortcuts you want, but Ctrl-Shift-M works for me. Once you have the shortcut assigned, press Accept, press OK, and to see whether or not the shortcut works, you can remove the mask of this layer by pressing Backspace and pressing the shortcut key Ctrl-Shift-M, and it should automatically create a mask and hides the selection for you. Okay, now that we have everything out of the way, we will be making the YouTube logo. The first thing we will be doing is selecting the mask on the right hand side. And pressing B on our keyboard shortcut, we can bring up the brush tool. You can also click the brush on the left hand side of the panel. Now what we can do is right click anywhere you like, and then choose a brush that fits for the shape that we're going for. In this case, we wanted to use the square rounded, which gives off the edge a little bit more of the rounded shape. Now exit out of the brush panel by left clicking on the canvas, and with our mask selected, we want to make sure our foreground color is set to white. To alternate in between the colors, you can press this little icon right here, or pressing X on the keyboard to alternate in between. And if your color is set to anything other than black and white, you can reset it by clicking this icon right here. Now with white selected, just left click on the canvas to draw the shape you want. If you happen to have drawn over the edge, you can press X on your keyboard and bring up the foreground color black to erase some of the selections. And as you can see in our mask right here, by pressing Alt or Options on the keyboard and left clicking on the mask, you can see we have made a selection where the white reveals the shape and black doesn't reveal the shape. Pressing Alt or Option and clicking on the mask again to bring us back onto the main canvas. Okay, now the next thing we'll be doing is adding a little bit of shadow to our shape that we have just created. And to do this, you can go over to the right hand side and double click on the layer to bring up the layer style. And down at the layer styles, you want to enable drop shadow to create a little bit of the shadow for our shape. If you don't see the drop shadow layer, you can go over to the FX icon and clicking on it to enable a drop shadow. Now we have two drop shadows enabled, but I only wanted to do one drop shadow for the tutorial, so I'll be disabling this one. Looking at the drop shadow options, there are a bunch of sliders for you to experiment with. You have the opacity, the distance, the spread, and the size. And the other thing I want to note is the color of the shadow. Sometimes you may want to set the color to something else besides black, which I'll explain a little bit later down the video. And when it comes to the distance, let's see, maybe set something a little bit wider and then set the size a little bit bigger so that it softens the shadow and makes it look more realistic. You can leave everything else the same and press OK. As you can see, when you zoom in, the edges have these little bit of shadow to it that makes it much more realistic. And with the brush that Reeds used to create this, it simulates really realistic textures as if they were done physically. Okay, now that we have created the shape and added the drop shadow, the next thing we will be doing is making that play button in the middle. So we'll be clicking on the mask for our first layer, which is the white texture, and pressing B again on our keyboard shortcuts to bring up the brush tool, and right clicking on the canvas to pull up the brush selections. And this time we wanted to choose something like a triangle. In this case, we will be going for the triangle medium, and pressing R on our keyboard to rotate the canvas to the right, and then pressing Alt or Command on our keyboard and right click to change the size of our brush diameter. In this case, somewhere like 400 pixels should be okay, and we'll just be left clicking once to create that play button in the middle. Pressing R again on our keyboard to rotate the canvas back to the center. And as you can see, we got our play button right in the middle. Instead of creating an entirely new shadow, this time we'll be using the template that we have given you, which is the felt style right here. By having this layer selected, you can just double click on the felt style to actually apply the style directly onto this layer. As you can see, this one comes with a bevel and emboss as well as a drop shadow. To edit our effect, you can just double click our effect panel to bring up the layer style once more. And our bevel emboss, the settings for this is really basic, with our highlights and shadows set as black, and our bevel style is outer bevel. When it comes to the style, most of the time you will be playing around with inner bevel and outer bevel. It depends on the look you're going for. Inner bevel allows you to create these rounded edges, whereas outer bevel creates these sharper edges, which appears as if they were cut out using a scissor. And the depth that we went for is 400%. We kept the direction up, the size is 1, softened as 1 pixels. And yeah, that's pretty much it, and we just press OK. Now we zoom back out to see the overall look of the illustration, and it seems like the white part, the middle part of the play button, the shadows are still a little bit too dark. So what we're going to do is we're going to double click on the effects again to bring up the layer style panel. And when we go to our drop shadow, we wanted to change the color of our shadow to be somewhere like red. This looks a lot better, but we're going to drag this a little bit down just in between the black and the original red spot and pressing OK. And the second thing we wanted to do is remove the bevel in emboss so that it removes that dark layer right underneath the shape. Okay, now that we have removed the bevel and emboss, the next thing we want to tweak just a little is the size, and we just wanted to reduce the size just a little, perhaps down to 24 pixels, and then reduce the distance just a little to somewhere like 13. And now we just press OK. And as you can see, with these small adjustments, the overall illustration looks a little bit more realistic compared to before. Now, with our illustration completed, the other tip I wanted to give you is sometimes the textures themselves might be a little bit too zoomed in, and that there are too much textures for the overall feel of the illustration. And to fix this, you may need to unlink the layer for the shape that you wanted to change, and then pressing Ctrl T on the keyboard once again to resize the texture so that it looks more fitting for the overall illustration. Now, by reducing the size of the image, the texture themselves are less zoomed in, which matches the overall feel of the illustration. Yeah, that's pretty much it when it comes to creating these felt-like illustrations. The workflow is really simple. All there is this bunch of color textures you drag on top, and then you apply an effect layer style on top of each one. And we have created a whole bunch of different colors and textures for you to choose from, and you can create any illustration that you like. And now I wanted to show you some of my other illustrations that I made for Studio Vision. This is the first illustration that I did, and as you can see, it was made out of a lot of different layers with a lot of different masks. And here's the second illustration that I did. And when you zoom in, you can see that using the brushes, you can create these really realistic looks as if they were actually cut out from actual fabrics. You can pretty much play around with these brushes and just create any shape you like. With the layer style attached to it, you can immediately create these realistic felt-like effects. Here is another illustration that I did using the felt maker. When you zoom in, you can see how most of the textures are, and you just pretty much overlay it with the drop shadow, and there is a bevel and emboss for some of these as well. When you double click on the bevel emboss, you can see that I just pretty much apply the inner bevel to the style and apply a certain depth and just pretty much left everything the same. And when it comes to drop shadow, I chose a much lighter color because of this white background color and set the opacity to something like 36%, distance at 21, size at 38. But most of the time, you just want to use your eyes to pretty much gaze whether or not the shadows look right. It's hard to say, but you can just work around the sliders until the shadows seem fit. Here are some other ones. This one is really cool too. For this color of yellow, originally the felt fabric it's a little bit seen through, so what I decided to do was I actually made a copy of it and clipped it onto this one and changed the blending mode to screen to make it so that it's a lot brighter and less see-through. You can see that without this, it's a lot darker. There's a lot more spots on it, but when you make a copy and then apply screen, it makes the texture a lot more appealing. And yeah, that's pretty much it when it comes to creating these illustrations. I have recorded the entire process of creating them, and I'll be posting them in another video for you guys to see. This is Leon from Studio Vision, and I hope you guys enjoy this product as much as we did enjoy making that for you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.